Good evening, everyone. My name is Johnette McCowan, and I have the privilege of serving as president of McLennan Community College. And I want to extend a warm welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. Today marks the anniversary of September 11th, a day forever etched in our nation's memory. We remember the lives lost, the families forever changed, and the first responders who ran toward danger with extraordinary courage. While it is a day of remembrance and pain, it also is a day that reminds us of the strength we find when we come together as Americans, standing side by side in grief, in resilience, and in hope. Our thoughts today are also with the family of Charlie Kirk, as we are reminded of the divisions and tragedies our country continues to face. In these moments of loss, fear, and uncertainty, we pray for healing and for the peaceful resolution of differences. Our ability to gather together here in dialogue, in pursuit of understanding, and in respect for one another reflects the very best of who we are. The McLennan Community College Honors College, Presidential Scholars, and First Generation Scholars now join me in welcoming you, our guests, to our campus for the Ken Starr Lecture. We are honored that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh agreed to come to Waco to discuss judging and the Constitution. Justice Kavanaugh and Judge Starr were friends as well as colleagues, so we are grateful that Justice Kavanaugh is speaking on our campus, a place Judge Starr loved. This series was created to encourage thoughtful conversation on important issues. I want to thank our MCC employees and area law enforcement officials for their hard work to make this event happen on campus. And a special thanks particularly to Ashley Cruz Turner, who is part of the conversation tonight and a history professor here at MCC, as well as a division chair. And also to our friend Alice Starr for her role in bringing Justice Kavanaugh to McLennan Community College. Alice Starr is CEO of Starr Strategies Company, a consulting firm which assists nonprofit organizations with marketing, public relations, and event planning. Alice is past chair of the Central Texas Food Bank and was active on the board of the Cameron Park Zoo. She currently serves on the boards of Waco Symphony and Art Center of Waco Legacy Society, and in helping prosper Waco as a member of the steering committee for its 10th anniversary. She serves on the Mayburn Museum Board of Advocates, National Museum of Women in Art Texas Committee, and Esther's Closet Advisory Board. And she also enjoys service on Mount Vernon's Washington Cabinet and the Supreme Court Historical Society. Alice and her late husband, Ken Starr, were active volunteers with the Presidential Scholars and the Honors College programs. Together, they have been mentors and inspirations for many aspiring MCC students. So when he passed away in 2022, we thought it fitting to recognize his dedication and love for MCC by creating this lecture series. Please help me welcome Alice Starr to the podium to introduce our presenters.
Thank you so very much, Dr. McCown. I feel she's the best president of a community college in the nation. She's done so much for MCC. And my family and close friends are here tonight. We are so honored that you created this lecture in my husband, Ken Starr's name. Thank you so much. It was on 9/11, 2001, 24 years ago today, that my husband, Ken, and I were to have lunch at the White House mess, known as the Navy mess, with Brett Kavanaugh. Brett was serving as associate counsel to the president, and he was also staff secretary to the cabinet, associate counsel to the president, George W. Bush. So it was going to be a reunion of sorts, because Brett had worked for Ken when Ken was Solicitor General of the United States, and when he served in the Office of Independent Counsel, Brett served on his team. And then when he went to a law firm, Kirkland & Ellis, in the Washington, D.C. office, Brett joined him there. So we knew Brett, and we were anxious to get together again. But alas, that did not happen on 9/11. Am I doing something wrong? Okay. As we all know, 2 planes that very morning crashed into the World Trade Center. Another plane crashed into the Pentagon. And a 4th plane was on its way to the White House or the Capitol. And it was a devastating time. President was in Florida with some school children at a school, and Brett was there at the office with the people who were in charge. And I know it was a traumatic time, and he had to help with how do you deal with the worst enemy attack in United States history. So maybe we'll hear a little bit about that tonight. Justice Kavanaugh's bio is in your program. Did you all receive a program? I think you did. And his bio is so impressive, having graduated at the top of his class at Yale Undergraduate School and Yale Law School, having clerked for 3 eminent federal judges, including Supreme Court Justice Kennedy, and having taught in several law schools for 18 years, I believe he said. Like my husband, Brett has never turned down public service. He could be making millions of dollars as a partner in a national law firm, but instead, he has chosen, like so many of the judges who are here tonight, and I thank you for coming, he has chosen a life in the judiciary. It's a very noble life. And I'm so glad he did. He met his beautiful wife, Ashley, who is from Abilene, Texas, and could not be with us tonight because they still have a daughter in high school. But he met her at the White House, and George Bush will tell you that he introduced them. And he also participated in their wedding. It was a beautiful affair, and it was so wonderful. And she was working as his special assistant since he was governor, and Brett was working in another position, but somehow they met and got married, and we heard tonight that President Bush tried to hurry it along. And when he would come to Waco often, because as you know, President George W. Bush's second home was in Crawford, Brett would come down with him and enjoy actually staying in a trailer in Crawford. So he's no stranger to Waco. Judge Kavanaugh is a man of complete integrity. Although his credentials are elite, he could not be more humble or more friendly and kind to others. That is why I was so distraught when his character was called into question during his confirmation hearings for his Supreme Court nomination. Not one bit of the negative press was true. And you know, I had been through this with my husband when he was independent counsel, and I know how devastating it is to the family. It's a terrible thing, but it happens, and he's been so brave and stood through it, and I'm proud of you, Brett. Justice Kavanaugh not only hired all female clerks his first year on the court, which was a record, but he's gone out of his way to help all his clerk and his staff with their careers. And he's just couldn't be more helpful and friendly. And in addition, he meets with the MCC, Presidential Scholars, and of the Honors College students when they come to Washington to visit the White House, the Supreme Court, and he takes them in his chambers and lets them ask questions. It's a wonderful time and life-changing for him. And Congressman Sessions is here tonight, and he provides the best tours of the White House and the Capitol you can imagine for these students. So it's wonderful that their education goes beyond Waco. Justice Kavanaugh, we're so pleased you're here in Waco. And MCC's renowned history professor, Ashley Cruz-Turner, is on stage with you tonight, and I know it's going to be a most interesting conversation. Professor Cruz-Turner has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Baylor University. He did his postgraduate studies at Tulane University, so he's well educated. And he chairs the Social and Behavioral Studies Division at MCC and has taught here for more than 25 years. We're so pleased that you'll be in conversation tonight. Take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Alice. Judge Starr would have loved this evening because he loved America and he loved the Constitution and he loved the Article III branch and he loved the High Court. We were on this stage not too many years ago with your colleague, Justice Thomas, and I remember Judge Starr saying it's going to be very informal tonight. I'm going to call Ashley, and he's going to call me Ken. I really didn't, and we're gonna call his honor. So tonight, Your Honor, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, President McGowan, Alice Starr, the Starr family, great friends. It's an honor. It's wonderful to be back in Central Texas. I spent a lot of time here with President Bush. It's an honor in particular to be here in recognition of Ken Starr. Ken Starr was a patriot, a public servant. He lifted everyone up. He made everyone feel better. He helped everyone do better. Committed public servant for so many years as a judge. He inspired me. I would not be on the Supreme Court but for Ken Starr, because he inspired me to love the Constitution and love the law. He had a commitment to religious liberty, which I think has been very important and which obviously comes up, protecting the First Amendment to the United States Constitution on our court, and just a great friend and mentor. I miss him terribly. At the same time, I'm so grateful for the inspiration he provided me, and it's really quite an honor to be here in recognition of him tonight. So thank you for having me in honor of Ken Starr tonight.
Well, as you say, we are here in celebration of the legacy of a great American, Judge Ken Starr. It's become a tradition that we hold up the green Ken Starr Constitution, a man who loved this document so much that he had commemorative copies printed up when he was inaugurated as the 14th president of Baylor University. And not these particular copies, but like you, he carried a copy.
I got one. Never leave home without it. Never leave. It's good.
I've never seen him when he didn't have that there. He walked the earth incredibly joyously with that pocket Constitution at his side, and so he never lost that excitement for it. We do have you've said some kind words about Judge Starr. We do have a tradition of exchanging sort of a Ken Starr memory on this occasion, as we've said, but we can never say too much. Judge Starr was a very important person in the life of our community and also in the life of this college. And I know Judge Starr was a very important person in your life, and maybe you can talk about just a little bit about what that relationship meant to you.
Well, I remember the first time I interviewed with him when he was Solicitor General of the United States in the Justice Department, and he immediately was very interested in all aspects of my life on the resume and was asking questions about my high school basketball. This was not your usual Solicitor General interview, let's put it that way, because he had an interest in other people, a genuine interest in other people. And I still remember that first meeting so well. He loved Texas. I remember when Ashley and I got married up in Washington, there were a lot of Texans from Abilene who made the trek. And Ken's never been happier at a wedding reception to talk all these Texans. And afterwards they were all saying, that Ken Starr, what a great guy. And exactly, Ken Starr, what a great guy.
It is, yeah. Well, Mrs. Starr mentioned where you were on 9/11. We are 24 years out from that eventful day. Can you talk about what 9/11 means to you in the context of what you were doing on that day and beyond?
Yeah, every September 11th, I think back to that day, what we were doing in the counsel's office. I think back to President Bush and his leadership of the country. On the September 12th, 2001, he came into the Oval Office and said, this will not happen again. This will not happen again in the United States of America. We are not going to allow this to happen again. And the country, of course, moved on as it should, trying to get somewhat back to normal over time. But I always say for President Bush, every day for the next 7+ years was September 12th, 2001. He had to defend America. He woke up in the morning thinking how he was going to protect all of us. He went to bed at night hoping he wasn't awakened in the middle of the night by news of an attack. That's an enormous burden to carry for one person. He knew if there were another attack, he'd say, Bush, why didn't you do more? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And the way he led the country through that time, I think we need to appreciate. Every September 11th, I always watch the old videos, and I did it yesterday at home before I came down. So I watched the videos, especially for the younger people here who may not remember or have even been alive for September 11th. The video when he was talking in the Oval Office on September 13th, 2001 to Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki, and he teared up in the Oval Office saying, I'm a loving guy, but I have a job to do, and I'm going to do it. And on September 14th, 2001, to watch the video of him at the National Cathedral. What an inspirational speech at that service. Then, of course, later that afternoon in New York on the rubble, where he said, I can hear you, the rest of the world can hear you, and the people who knock these buildings down are going to hear all of us soon. And then the workers, the rescue workers, break out into chants of USA, USA. What a moment. I think for me, that's the single moment in my lifetime where I think about the inspiration and leadership he provided to the country. And then September 20th, 2001, in his speech to Congress, she starts off by recognizing Lisa Beamer, who was the wife of Todd Beamer, who of course had stormed the cockpit on Flight 93. And that's the whole speech is quite moving and also quite explanatory as to what was at stake for the United States of America going forward and how difficult it would be. But he was also optimistic about the future. And I think when I think back to President Bush, I think about his leadership, the difficulty of being president. Our job can be difficult at times. It's nothing like being president and the various duties, particularly national security, you have to do. And I think back to all the lessons I learned from him. And one of them, I think, which led us out, we're in a dark moment right here today in our country, but he led us out of a dark moment because he was always positive and optimistic. And I think that's really important for all of us as Americans, to be civil, as President emphasized, and collegial, but to be positive and optimistic about the future. And President Bush used to say he lived on the sunrise side of the mountain, not the sunset side of the mountain. He had a painting in the Oval Office by Tom Lee, a painter from El Paso, West Texas. All 8 years he was in the Oval Office, and he used to quote that all the time: be optimistic, see the day that is coming, not the day that is gone. And when I was confirmed to the Supreme Court, my former clerks got together and got me a replica of that painting. So it's above my desk at the Supreme Court. And when the MCC students come and visit, they hear me prattle on about sunrise side of the mountain. But every morning when I come in, I'm grateful for the opportunity and also reminded to be positive and optimistic about our country, about our Constitution. And I really thank President Bush so much for all he taught me as well, and the inspiration. And on this day in particular, I think we think back 24 years ago, and we should be grateful to him for all he did to lead us through, I think, the most difficult time in the country's history, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, feels like two mysteries there. Number one, did President Bush introduce you to your wife or not?
I never try to openly disagree with President Bush. Yes, he was instrumental, let's put it that way. And the hurry along, I think, really understates his, as you all might know here in Central Texas, he's not I wouldn't call patience his strongest trait. And so he was very much encouraging because he knew, he worked closely with Ashley. She was his personal aide who sat right outside the Oval Office, and she knew her strength of character, which Justice Starr alluded to. And Justice Kavanaugh is one tough person, and I'm grateful to President Bush for giving me a little nudge when I needed a little nudge on that front.
And not your first time in Waco, Texas, as we said.
Yes.
Any crazy stories, fond memories of the Crawford years?
So we would come down every August for a few weeks when I was staff secretary working for President Bush, and that was 2003, July 2003 to May 2006, really challenging times, of course, in the country. But we would come, I would travel everywhere around the world or country with the president. So whether it was Moscow or Beijing or the Vatican, Buckingham Palace, Afghanistan, and he would come down to Crawford in the summer in August, and we spent about 3 weeks there. And he had a thing that we would do a run, a 3-mile run, anyone who was there, or staff who was there, and we would do it though when it was over 100 degrees. So we would wait till, he would wait till about 1, and he had a thermometer, you know, he's a very detailed guy, a thermometer, and we would get out there, and the rule was if you made it through the 3-mile run in the 100-degree heat without walking or passing out, you would get a t-shirt, 100-degree club t-shirt. And I will say, I'm proud of a lot of things. I'm proud to have that 100-degree t-shirt. And I still have those t-shirts nicely stacked away in my closet. I don't wear them anymore because I don't want them to ruin them. But that's a great memory, running and just being with the president in Crawford was a special time to see him relax. As president, I got to see this up close. It's very hard to have a moment to relax. It's very hard, and I already alluded to the national security, but you have so much on your plate, so much responsibility. To see him be able to do that and to be with them and to travel everywhere with them around the world, I think was very special. We were at Buckingham Palace for a state dinner, and we landed on the lawn in a chopper on the lawn at Buckingham Palace. And you might say, well, why didn't you just drive in? Because there were so many protesters ringing the city that we had to land on the lawn. But the Queen met us all at the door, and we're all studying furiously our etiquette books as we walk in. And we stayed, as I stayed in Buckingham Palace for a few nights, and the Queen had a state dinner for President Bush, which I was fortunate enough to attend. And I remember we were walking up the stairs from where we were to the room, and Condi Rice was there, and Joe Hagan and Blake Gottesman, and the president just turned to all of us and said, "This is so unlikely." Which I thought was a great moment of humility about himself and perhaps recognition of how he had come, because it really hits you as president when you go to a foreign country, and when you're in Buckingham Palace with the Queen, it's pretty special. Another memory from that I'll just mention is when we went to the Vatican to meet Pope John Paul II. That would have been in 2004. And President Bush was awarding the Pope the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The Pope didn't come, was pretty frail then, wasn't going to come to Washington, so we went to him, to the Vatican. And we are in the room, and it's being televised, of course, nationally here and all over the world. And President Bush gave the Medal of Freedom to the Pope, and the Pope held up the medal, and he was a little frail, and God bless America. You know, and as a Catholic kid, as I am, and to be there with the President of the United States and Pope John Paul II, who I think did so much for freedom in Eastern Central Europe and so much a beacon of principle, to be there in that room, I don't think I'll ever top that. That was pretty special in terms of memories with President Bush.
Well, we're awfully glad that you were there to support him in those times, and we're awfully glad that you're with us here tonight. Judging in the Constitution, trying to get at what role the Constitution plays in our history and our political culture. We're awfully sentimental about this 236-year-old system of rules and bylaws. There's a lot of details, a lot of words, 450 words. I heard you mention it today with students. It was one of Ken Starr's, Judge Starr's favorite ways of talking about it. He liked to talk about the architecture of the Constitution, like to think about what's the theory of government that animates this framework. Why does it work so well? It's been imitated a lot of places, but it doesn't seem to work that well for everybody else. But it works for us. So I guess my question is, what is the genius of the Constitution?
Well, I think the genius of the Constitution is its separation of powers. The framers and founders of our country were breaking off from concentration of power. Of course, you read the Declaration of Independence with all the grievances about the concentration of power. And the framers recognized in a way that I think is brilliant that preserving liberty required separating power. No one person or group of people should have too much power in our system. And so they created three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. They split the legislature into two, House and Senate. They provided for both a national government and the state governments. And by dividing power in so many different ways, the framers saw presciently that individual liberty would be better preserved under that system. And so we have specified individual liberties, for example, in the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, and what have you. But those would be meaningless without the protection of the separation of powers and, not surprisingly, I think the independent judiciary is critically important to preserving our individual freedoms and the separation of powers in our system. And it's not only our individual freedoms. I think our country has been successful, the most successful in the world, not only in protecting liberty, but also in ensuring a thriving economy so that the country can do well. Obviously, both those things we don't always do perfectly at that, but I think the Constitution has set up a system of government that has allowed both individual liberty and economic success. And one of the parts that's genius of the Constitution is allowing the people to govern themselves on a lot of critical issues, democracy. So it facilitates democracy, divides power, and has a floor of protection of fundamental individual rights without which none of it would work, such as free speech, freedom of religion, due process, equal protection, and the like. So that's how I think about it, the separation of powers. Someone's asked you, what's the importance of the separation of powers? It protects individual liberty by dividing power, preventing concentration of power, and thereby ensuring that each person can live in liberty.
Well, I love it that you first focus with separation of powers. Let's put a pin in that and come back, because we have the community stack of questions. And so, again, thank you for being here tonight. I've looked at over 300 questions that have been submitted in some form. Yeah. We may only get to 200, but so much interest, and a ton of those questions came in on separation of powers. So I do have some questions in the stack that get us back there, but for just a second, let's just get at what you do. I know at one point we used that movie line about what is it exactly that you would say you do here, right? It was a comedy, by the way. But last year we hosted federal judge Brantley Starr of the Northern District and Judge Don Willett of the United States Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit. And we noted with good humor that their courts were not actually mentioned in the Constitution. In fact, they even quoted the line, a Supreme Court and inferior courts established by Congress, right? So Congress has 94 district courts. They're approximately, I actually get confused by this, either 11, 12, or 13 circuit courts. But there's only 13, okay. There is only one Supreme Court, and it exists outside the pleasure of Congress. And so what is so you talked about ambition, counteracting ambition is the way the Federalist authors called it, talking about that. So what is it about the Supreme Court and the Article III branch, the courts? What role are they doing in that system?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important that we're independent. And what that word means is that we cannot be removed. We have life tenure. We can't be removed except through the impeachment process, but we cannot be removed based on our decisions. And that's really important because our job is to interpret and apply the law in cases or controversies, to use the language of Article III. And when we do that, we may have to rule that what the Congress has done in passing legislation violates the Constitution, or what the president or executive branch has done in applying a statute violates that statute or otherwise violates the Constitution. And we are the final word on whether a legislative action, an executive action, a state, if a state takes enacts legislation, on whether that violates the Constitution. And to do that, we need to be independent because we're going to make unpopular decisions. And why is that the case? Why isn't popularity our goal? Our job is to enforce and apply the law regardless of whether it's popular in a particular case. Think of freedom of speech, a lot of unpopular speech. Our job is to protect that, not to take a poll on whether people agree. Minority religions, to protect religious freedom regardless of your faith. For criminal defendants, those cases would not be very popular to rule for the criminal defendant. You need an independent judiciary, an independent Supreme Court to stand up for due process even when it's not popular. We had several death penalty cases this past term, one out of Oklahoma, a controversial case where we ruled for the defendant and ordered a new trial. That was not popular, but it was because we are independent and don't have to worry about running for re-election or getting reappointed. And that independent judiciary, I think, allows the court to protect those rights and liberties specified in the Constitution or specified in federal statutes, even when it may not be popular. In other words, do the right thing. That's the job of the court, not the popular thing.
Well, yeah. Please.
Can I add something there, which is, I don't want to sound like should be oblivious to what the public thinks about the court. We've got to be mindful that the success of this project that we've been for more than 2 centuries depends on the people of the United States respecting the judiciary and respecting the Supreme Court. And so how do we do that over time if we have to make unpopular decisions? That's a very challenging thing to do. And I think what we have to do, what we try to do, and what the court historically has tried to do, is to apply whatever principles are in the Constitution as we read it, or in our precedents as we read it, and apply those principles consistently. One of the Chief Justice likes to say judges are like umpires. Now, what makes a good umpire a good referee? Did you ever, by the way, cheer for an umpire? No. Okay. So what makes a good umpire or referee? One of the things that makes a good umpire or referee, among others, is consistency, calling it the same way for both teams. And as judges, we really have to look in the mirror. Are we doing the same thing for Republicans and Democrats, for the business interests, the labor interests, the developer and the environmental interests, whatever it might be? We have to look ourselves in the mirror and make sure over time we're being consistent in how we apply our principles. And we have to make sure the losing party respects the decision. Think about that. The losing party has to respect the decision. If you ever walked out of a game where your team lost and said, God, we lost, but the refs were great. Never, right? So that's hard, but that's part of our job, and part of the way we do that is how we treat the lawyers at oral argument. I try to really go out of my way to make sure both sides are getting a fair hearing. How we write our opinions to make sure the losing party feels like they were heard and that we respected them. And of course they're not going to like the decision, the losing party. But hopefully over time, we need the losing party to respect the process. And hopefully over time, if we're consistent, if we're neutral, if we're impartial, if we explain ourselves, and this is hard, this is, one brick at a time kind of thing, and building it up and maintaining it. But over time, hopefully we maintain respect, because we're going to need that, because we have to do those unpopular things that are the right things.
So I heard a book title, I think of a book coming out, but the last branch standing, meaning
there are three branches.
But right, the idea that if we respect the judiciary, we will respect the Constitution, and so it's that is quite a responsibility. And
well, I'll just say we need to I want respect the Congress, for they have a very hard job. Congressman, thank you for your service. The executive branch, I've already talked about the job of being president, how difficult that is, and I think the judiciary as well. All three branches need to work well for this to continue to thrive.
In terms of the working of the court, so if you listen to pundits, and I don't recommend it, and if you do listen to a pundit, make sure it's a pundit you agree with.
No.
That's not it. But so sometimes you might hear the court reporting and think every decision is a 6-3 decision along these crazy lines. Actually, I think this year 42% of all the decisions were unanimous, and it's actually higher in some years. And then when you drill down deep enough, of the 60 or so cases decided, less than 10% were actually divided along what anybody could say were ideological lines. Mm-hmm. But having said that, and again, had one of our Baylor students say, but there's got to be some politics in there. Is there a sense among the justices that some cases are more important than others, that some are going to be more controversial than others, and some are going to be more contested than others? And what's that like?
Okay, a lot packed into that one.
Yeah.
First of all, on the pundits, one of the things I like to say, when you're a judge, you got to be not afraid. You can't worry about criticism. If you don't like criticism, this is the wrong line of work. But at the same time, you can't tune out responsible critiques. I always want to do better tomorrow than I did today, every day. And I want the court to do better always. And so you pay attention to responsible critiques that might come from a law school professor or might come from a commentator. And so you have to pay attention to those. So I do pay attention to, and of course I talked about respect for the court over time, and I think it's important to pay attention to what's being said out there, not, there's a lot of noise, but to get through that. In terms of important cases, here's what I always say, which is the most important case is the case I'm working on right now, because to the people who are the litigants in that case, that's the most important thing in the world to them, and I owe them my undivided attention and treat that. There's no such thing as an off day or an off case in this job. You can't approach it that way. And so I try to give every case, and I think my 8 colleagues, who are all fabulous, do the same thing. The work ethic, I will say, of the 9 of us right now, again, I'm biased, but I think the work ethic is extraordinary. The preparation level that you'll see at oral argument, or if you listen to oral argument, of the 9 justices. In our conference room, it's just the 9 of us in there, no staff, and we're talking about all the weightiest cases we have and all the cases on our docket, and the level of respect and preparation as you go around the table. It starts with the Chief Justice, goes around in order of seniority. No one can talk twice until everyone's talked once. Good rule. I've tried that at home, by the way. Does not translate, but anyway, it's a good rule for Supreme Court. And in 7 years there, I've never heard someone yell, say something acerbic, sarcastic, rude. It's a level of respect in the room that's helping us all talk together to find the best answer to all the cases that we have in particular matters. Now, why do some cases divide in particular ways? We have judicial philosophies, and maybe that's part of why we disagree in a particular case, is the judicial philosophy overarching. You might have a broader view of free speech, and a colleague might have a narrower view of the free speech precedents, and that might play itself out. But we're all trying our best, and they're all my 8 of my colleagues are patriots and devoted to the Constitution. And I think the way the process works in the conference room is really impressive. When I first got there, Justice Ginsburg was still there, and we miss her terribly, Justice Ginsburg. And she was a great role model for all of us, but she had been there when I was a law clerk there for Justice Kennedy, so I had a little trouble calling her Ruth. I was calling her, and we all call each other by our first names, and finally one of my colleagues said, "You got to call her Ruth. She's her colleague." But Ruth was a special person in the history of the Supreme Court, but also special to me, the way she welcomed me. So she taught me as much as anyone about the collegiality of the Supreme Court and the civility. She assigned me an important antitrust case that was 5-4, and the chief was on the other side from me early in my tenure, and she assigned me to do the writing. That was about 6 or 8 weeks in, and I remember saying to Justice Kagan, she gave me the assignment, any advice? I was a little nervous, and Justice Kagan said, "Just do it fast." Ruth likes speed, and Justice Kagan then added, "and make it perfect." All right, with that in mind, work. But Justice Ginsburg, as Alice Starr mentioned, I had 4 women clerks my first year, and that was the first time that had ever happened. And it meant a majority of the clerks in the building that year, of the 36, were women. First time that had ever happened in the history of the Supreme Court. And Justice Ginsburg was very much supportive of that. She had done as much as anyone, of course, for equality for all Americans, including women. And she talked publicly about that and credited me, thanked me for that. And that's in my first year. Let's just say it was not obvious that she would go out there and start talking about me in the fall of 2018, spring of 2019. And people, I'm sure, that she was talking to didn't want to hear about me, but she didn't care because I was her colleague now. And she had my back as my colleague. And that taught me a lot about the way the Supreme Court operates. I told my clerks at the end of the year, I said, "You're going to get a picture of me, the 4 of you with me, and that you can put that in your attic, but you all need to get a picture with Justice Ginsburg, because that will be a historic photo." And they did do that. Justice Ginsburg took a photo with them, and I have that when you come into my office. It's right there on the table next to my couch, the picture of my 4 law clerks with Justice Ginsburg, because I think she set the tone and set the standard for civility that we're all trying to live up to as we do our daily work at the Supreme Court.
Well, maybe pivot to, you talked about differing worldviews, collegiality among people who don't see everything exactly right. Last year, Judges Willett and Starr explained that they were limited by the law, the Constitution, and Supreme Court precedents. And they didn't say this exactly, and I know they're here, so I don't mean to put words in their mouth. But I got the feeling they thought the Supreme Court did not face the same limits. But I bet you don't feel like you have unlimited power, right? What are the limiting principles in terms of Supreme Court jurisprudence?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two big changes when you go from a Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court. The first is that it's 8 other people. It's a group of 9. There's not panels of 3 and a different panel tomorrow, or you're on different committees in Congress. It's the same group every time. And so you really have to learn how to work with each of the 8 other people and understand them. One of the things we do to build relationships at the Supreme Court is we have lunch after every oral argument and conference, just the 9 of us. And the rule at lunch is you can't talk about work. Probably a good thing. We talk about each other's kids, we talk about war stories, we talk about sports or books or movies or what, and you get to know the other people so well. And that collegiality and respect you develop for other people, like I said earlier, you know they're patriots, you know they're committed to the Constitution, you know they're good people. Just because you have a different view of the free speech clause does not make you a bad person. And it's really important, especially today, for us to remember all that. So that's one of the things and you have to compartmentalize, because you're going to be disagreeing passionately with one of your colleagues on one case that maybe you're discussing at conference that Friday. And at the same time, that colleague's your biggest ally on another case that's being discussed at the same conference. So you can't let your disappointment, irritation, disagreement with one case find its way into your working together on another case. So being able to work well with each other and compartmentalize is really important. The second big difference, to get to the core of your question, is that the Supreme Court can overrule its own precedent. And of course, historically, that's been important. Brown versus Board of Education overruled Plessy versus Ferguson, which had upheld separate but equal, and Brown versus Board held, no, that's not consistent with the Constitution. And racial equality is a principle in the 14th Amendment, and thank God it did overrule Plessy versus Ferguson. So it's a high bar to overrule, but the court does it now and then when we think a prior decision was seriously wrong, when it's had impact that we think are not positive for the law. And it's a high bar, but we'll do it on occasion when we think those conditions are met. And on the Court of Appeals, you don't have that authority. In the Court of Appeals, I used to say, and I wrote, we have to follow the Supreme Court precedent in letter and in spirit. And that latter part's pretty important too. On the Supreme Court, we follow our own precedent, like I said, but we can narrow it, we can overrule it. We should do that lightly, high bar, under specified conditions, but we can do that. I'll just add one thing. After my first year there, that summer of 2019, I thought about this stare decisis issue, this precedent, and I knew it was coming up in a case about unanimous juries the next year. The court had previously held a jury to convict you did not need to be unanimous, and we were being asked to overrule that precedent and require a jury to be unanimous to convict you of a crime. And so I spent that summer thinking about precedent. I read every case that the Supreme Court had ever written about precedent. I had previously worked on a book with then Judge Gorsuch, about precedent, so I felt like I knew something, but I wanted to, and I thought about deeply how to do it, and I ended up voting to overrule that precedent in a case called Ramos versus Louisiana, and requiring juries now to be unanimous to convict someone of a crime. But it's very important to have a theory of stare decisis and precedent that you're going to try to apply consistently as well, and that's one of the huge changes when you get to be a Supreme Court justice.
Well, you mentioned Brown versus Board of Education. I've talked to you, I've heard you talk in the past about maybe it's your favorite case of all cases.
I think it's the greatest decision in Supreme Court history and in this country's history because of what it did to bring the promise of the 14th Amendment, equal protection, into closer to reality. It wasn't flipping a switch, of course, after Brown, but it declared the principle of racial equality, and of course, still trying to always live up to that, but how the court, and courageously and unanimously, came together in that case to issue that ruling, I think is a great moment. I keep 4 volumes of Supreme Court reports on my bookshelf that I think are the 4 cases I think about the most in terms of our job and our role as Supreme Court Justice: Marbury versus Madison, which recognized the power of judicial review; Brown versus Board, Youngstown Steel, and United States versus Richard Nixon. And I think those cases touch on different themes and principles that the courts applied over time that, as I sit there in my chair, I think about those cases and what they teach me for how to do my job today. But first among those is Brown versus Board of Education.
And such a success and so popular in our mind. But there is an undertone. There's almost a conservative pushback that would say, and I think about Obergefell, it makes same-sex marriage a constitutional right. There's this element that it's one thing one day and it's the other thing the other. And so I guess 2 things. Does that give the court too much power? And does it tempt us to put all of the thorny cultural issues into the lap of the court?
That's a good question. So I think one of the things that's really important about the court and to be a good judge, what is my role under the Constitution in this case? Our role as justices is not to solve all the economic or social problems of the United States. That's beyond our charter. That's for Congress and the president and the legislative process or the regulatory process or for the states to do. And so it's a mistake to think of the court as something, oh, they're going to solve this problem, going to solve that problem. We have to preserve democracy for the people to solve a lot of the problems. At the same time, as I mentioned, there's certain specified rights in the Constitution or in federal statutes, and it is our job to make sure we're applying those and upholding those in the cases that are properly before us. But there is every case. Judge Silberman, our friend on the DC Circuit, when I got to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Larry Silberman said, every case, ask yourself when you start the case, what is my role here? My role is not the policy issue. My role is not to insert my moral views into the case. My role is to try to interpret and apply the law passed by the democratic branches or enshrined in the Constitution as fairly and neutrally as I can. So you have to keep your policy and moral views out of it, and you can't assume, oh, it's my job to fix everything. That's the democratic process, that's the legislative process.
So that makes me think about, when I'm teaching the Washington administration, you've got Jefferson and Hamilton, and one is we used to call that strict construction, and one is broad construction. And in my lifetime, we've started talking about originalism, and then we've divided up originalism into some sort of different strains. Can you talk about, maybe even just tell us what originalism is, and what does that mean to jurisprudence today?
So I think originalism, and the way I think about constitutional interpretation, is you start with the words of the document. See, this thing is tattered, it's enduring. You got Justice Kennedy signed it. I've had it about 30 years, somehow I've not lost this, but the words are all underlined and marked up in here, and little notes to myself. And that is law. This is not aspirational. This is law, the words of the document. Now, we all know some of the words in the Constitution are vague or ambiguous. And so what do we look at then to interpret or apply the Constitution? We look at the historical practices leading up to the ratification of the Constitution. We look to the traditions and history of how the Constitution's been applied over time. We call that liquidation, to use the phrase that Madison used. In other words, how the branches have operated over time can inform how you think about vague or ambiguous provisions of the Constitution. I view all of that as within what I think about in terms of text, history, and tradition, which is how I think about originalism. Now, remember, precedent's really important. We start most cases, what's our precedent? Is our precedent control? Is it on point? But where there's gray area in the precedent, or where we think the precedent might be wrong, we do think about the original text, the history, the tradition as well. And that's what I think about with originalism. It's not our job to rewrite the principles or the text of the Constitution. At the same time, it's important for everyone to understand, it's not frozen in time. We apply the principles to modern conditions. So we apply the free speech clause to the internet. We apply the search and seizure protections of the Fourth Amendment to cars, even though the framers had no idea of course, about either of those things. So the Constitution's enduring. We apply its principles to modern situations, but it's not our job to rewrite it. It's to stick to what the text, history, and tradition tell us.
Let me move to the community stack. So only 299 more.
Good, we're getting there.
Yeah. From a private school leader in Waco, in your experience on the court, what lessons about justice, fairness, and civic responsibility do you believe every young American should carry with them into adulthood?
Yeah, I think from my experience on the court, and it goes back to my experience as a kid and my teacher, and I've mentioned this a lot before, but English teacher I had named Chris Abel, who taught me To Kill a Mockingbird. And I have the copy that we used back then, and on the inside cover he'd given us a paper assignment from To Kill a Mockingbird, and he said the lesson of To Kill a Mockingbird was standing in someone else's shoes. Standing in someone else's shoes. And that's a reminder to me, I think, to be a good judge and to be a good person, to be a good citizen, we all have to stand in each other's shoes to understand different perspectives. And we talked about civility and collegiality, but what does that really mean? To me, that means trying to stand in the other person's shoes to understand their perspective. I try to do that on the court. I try to do that as a citizen as well. And I think it's really important for all of us as students in public service, in business, to try to understand other people's perspectives on the court. You learn. As Justice Breyer came into my office when I first got to the court, I think it was confirmed on a Saturday evening. He came in on Monday. And he said, here's one word of advice for the court: listen. And yeah, that's great advice. Listen, because you learn by listening and by hearing other people's perspectives. It helps you make a better decision and also shows respect for the other people. So if there's one lesson over 20 years as a judge that reinforces what I learned as a kid, it's to try to understand other people's perspectives as best you can.
This question comes from a Mr. Brian Lamb from the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. Mm-hmm. Not really, but how would you feel about?
I was wondering about that.
How would you feel about televising court proceedings on C-SPAN?
I'm against that. I don't think we want to be TV celebrities, and I think my colleagues and I would be concerned. I don't want to speak for any of them, but just would be concerned about how that would change the dynamic of how judges behave. People behave differently on TV, how the lawyers would behave. I'm not sure the congressional experiment with that's been great over time, and so I think we want to keep it the way it is. Now, we do live stream the audio now. That's a COVID innovation. I think that's worked out well for educating people who are interested in the court, and I encourage you. I'm very, again, partial on this, but I think the court operating at oral argument is government at its finest, in my view, because we're working hard to find the best answer to really difficult issues on which lower courts, almost by definition, are divided. I think television might change the dynamic a bit. So,
but you're okay with the audio coming? The audio comes pretty quick, and of course
it's live now.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be a 10-second delay or something, but it's essentially live now, and we started that during COVID, and we kept it after COVID. And I think that's worked well, and I think we'll keep that for forever, probably.
Okay. So a question that we got over and over in different forms: what's the biggest threat to democracy or the American Republic in 2025?
Well, I think there are a lot of answers. That's a big question, needless to say. Yeah. I think the number one thing, I'm not going to use the word threat, the number one thing I think we all need to focus on, and you're focused on it on a regular basis, is education, and making sure our middle school and high school and college students understand the importance of this, and the importance of Congress, and the importance of the presidency and the states, and how our government operates, and how our rights are protected, and how we debate difficult issues in a civil way. And I think civics education for students is really important. I was lucky at Georgetown Prep that my history and government teacher was Steve Oakes. And he's still there teaching history and government. He taught Gorsuch as well. Neil Gorsuch and I both went to the same high school. And we had Steve Oakes down to Neil's chambers last year. Just the three of us sat in there for like an hour and a half, talking about American government and talking about things like we're talking about tonight. And it was so special. I think it was special for Mr. Oakes to be there with two students who were on the Supreme Court, but I think it was more special. Probably a good day for him, but anyway, it was more special for us, for Neil and I, to express our gratitude to him for inspiring us and teaching us. And we need, I appreciate all the teachers who teach our kids about government and democracy and all the principles and values that I think are necessary to sustain our country going forward. So civics education. I'll be quicker.
No, that's great. One of
I
our
was hoping this was the lightning round.
no. Yeah. Couple more questions I'd like to get to, but one of our students. Obviously, you're a person of faith.
Yes.
How do you balance your faith and your duty as a judge, and are there ever conflicts?
So my faith is central to me, to my person, but I take an oath to apply the Constitution, laws of the United States without regard to what my faith might dictate, what my moral views might be, what my policy views might be. So we don't want judges, in fact we take an oath not to, going up and just importing our faith or our moral views or our policy views in the Constitution. That would be antithetical to the whole notion of an independent, impartial judge who's applying the law. At the same time, my faith gives me great strength. In this job, you need a lot of strength to do the right thing, to withstand the criticism, to do the job. And my faith is very helpful in reminding me of the bigger picture of life and reinforcing how I operate and how I treat other people. I think at oral argument, when I try to treat other people the right way, that's influenced by my faith. That's not how I'm deciding the cases, but that's how I treat people. And in an opinion where I try to reach out to the losing party in the written opinion and explain it to them, I think that's influenced some by my faith. When I do public service outside the job, well, I've done a lot of my career, but government service, but I go with my friend Father John Ensler, Catholic Charities, and serve meals for the homeless. I mean, that's my faith. That's Matthew 25 telling me to make sure the most basic needs are met of feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and housing those who need shelter. So that's how my faith influences me.
Hey, yeah. So a lighter maybe history question, a go back in time question. You can't pick your own era. Yeah. Any era of the court, what do you think the best time to have been on the court if you couldn't be on right now? Is there a golden age out there somewhere?
You're excluding right now? Because I
you
like being there right now.
You love your colleagues and you love the court right now.
Yeah. Well, I think the John Marshall era, when John Marshall was Chief Justice and really establishing the Supreme Court as an independent branch of our government, that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, it would be amazing.
When Rehnquist was Chief Justice, I really look up to William Rehnquist. He's been a role model for me in how I've conducted myself and gone about, and really a role model in terms of my constitutional principles as well. So when he was Chief Justice, that would be one as well. I don't want to leave him out.
Yeah. Well, when we were looking, there'd been a lot of speculation. We did a lot of research and trying to figure out how many Supreme Court justices had been to how many colleges, how many community colleges, and after a lot of scientific stuff, we figured out not many. Exceedingly rare. What is clear is we just have been, we are incredibly privileged to have you here, and we talked about the relationship that we have with the Starr family, and again, so much loyalty to that family, so much loyalty to that man, that it would bring you here, and again, our great gift. And it's been such an honor, and we've got a few more things to do, but if you would allow us to just thank you one more time and just offer you a very warm Waco welcome with another round of applause.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
At this point, we get to welcome Vino Dean and Brenna Rollins to the stage, please. They serve as our student liaisons on the MCC board, and Brenna is also one of our distinguished presidential scholars, and Vino is a proud member of the Honors College.
Thank you, Professor Cruz-Turner and Justice Kavanaugh. What an honor it has been to have Justice Kavanaugh here at McLennan Community College. Thank you once again for sharing your story with our students and the broader MCC and Waco community. It has made a lasting impact. On behalf of the Honors College, the First Generation Scholars, and the McLennan Scholars, we want to express our deepest appreciation to you both for being part of this special occasion.
And Justice Kavanaugh, at MCC, we have a cherished tradition of presenting our guests with a memento to commemorate their visit. As many of you know, that our college's heritage is deeply rooted in Scottish Highlands, so we went far and wide, even all the way to Scotland, to look for a meaningful gift, and we are proud to present you both with a tie made from the authentic McLennan family tartan. We hope it serves as a small but meaningful reminder of this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Mind opening it?
Yes.
Yes.
Oops. I'm going to wear it with pride. Wear it with pride. Thank you so much. Great to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you for thinking about it.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
you.
Yeah, wonderful.
You definitely have to show the tie, too.
Okay.
Is it the same tie?
It is. It's harder to get open than you would think.
That's good. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Well, please join us in expressing our gratitude for the Presidential Scholars, the Honors College, and the First Generation Scholars. They've done an amazing job hosting this evening's event. So much work went into this. We're so happy. We were happy to collaborate with the Baylor Honors College and Tarleton Honors College, and so these scholars really made so much of this happen. Of course, we always thank Lindsay Vanek and Nira Balsaldua, who've done an amazing job. And again, it's a big team, and so we thank everybody so much. Oh, yeah. And of course, our most heartfelt thank you goes to the Starr family and Alice Starr, who is our patron saint, who never stops thinking about ways to do things for our students. And so what a blessing she has always been, what a blessing this whole family has always been. So obviously this evening would not have been possible without your generosity and your incredible support. And we know that Judge Starr would have deeply appreciated seeing so many friends, family members, and members of the community gathered here tonight and enjoying one of the people he cared about so much and thought of his great friend, Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. so much.
That was amazing.